The dates vary according to different accounts, and apparently the Theravadan and Mahayana traditions have different dates, which are about 61 years apart. And I can't remember which tradition has which dates, but I don't think it's that important to know. But I always think of the Buddha as living approximately 500 BCE. And I will post these on the website so you don't have to, copy them down. He was born in northern India near what we now know of as the country of Nepal. He was born into, his father was a ruler of a tribe in that part of India, the Shakyans. That's why he's known as Shakyamuni Buddha. So his hometown, or the base of his father's kingdom, or just to use that term, I don't know if it's entirely appropriate. I don't think he was exactly a king, but he was a sort of a ruler type or chieftain, perhaps, was Kapilavastu. And then Lumbini was the Buddha's actual birthplace because his mother traveled to her family home to give birth. That was the tradition. And she didn't quite make it, and she gave birth to him in Lumbini. His father's name was Suddhodana. His mother was Maya, or Mahamaya, who died soon after his birth. And so his aunt, her sister, Mahapajapati Gotami, raised the Buddha and was his stepmother. At about age 16, the Buddha was married to a woman named Yasodhara, and they had a son named Rahula, famous for becoming one of the Buddha's disciples later on. The destiny. When the baby Siddhartha was born, a wise man in the court of Suddhodana made a prediction that this child would either become a great ruler or a great religious teacher. Suddhodana preferred the former, so he tried to protect Siddhartha from any knowledge of the world's sufferings and difficulties, and really gave him a very lavish lifestyle of ease and pleasure, and very sheltered from what went on outside in the real world, so to speak. However, Siddhartha was curious and left the palace disguised and guided by one of his servants. And while outside the castle gates, he first saw an old man, and then a sick man, and then a corpse, and had to ask his servant, what is all this? What am I seeing? And his servant explained to him that this is what really goes on in life. People age, they become ill, and they die. On one of his trips outside, he also saw an ascetic, a wandering ascetic, and was inspired by this person's lifestyle. And we realized that one could seek for the truth and an answer to these conditions of life that pose so much suffering. So he renounced his life and began his search for answers and became a wandering ascetic himself. It is said that the horse's hooves were muffled by the gods to prevent the palace guards, from knowing of his departure. And that's a little picture of Siddhartha on his horse. So he began his life as a wandering ascetic by begging for alms in the streets of Rajagaha, which was, I think he traveled sort of down towards the Gangetic plain at this stage in his life. His first teacher was an ascetic named Alara Kalama, and he learned so much from this teacher that his teacher said, "I'd like you to appoint you my successor," but the Buddha wasn't satisfied with the extent of the teachings that he received. So he went to a second teacher named Udaka Ramaputta. The same thing happened, and Ramaputta said, "I'd like to appoint you my successor," and the Buddha wasn't satisfied with the extent of his teachings either. So he joined 5 companions led by Kaudinya, and their practice centered around very strict austerities, physical austerities. And so the Buddha practiced these almost to the point of death. And he realized that this was also not the answer. And this experience gave rise to his realization of the middle way, what we know of as the middle way. And this is actually a quote from the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, or setting the wheel of Dharma in motion. There are these two extremes that are not to be indulged in by one who has gone forth. Which two? That which is devoted to sensual pleasure with reference to sensual objects, that is base, vulgar, common, ignoble, unprofitable. So that's the lifestyle he knew in his princely existence. The other one is that which is devoted to self-affliction, painful, ignoble, unprofitable. Avoiding both of these extremes, the middle way realized by the Tathagata, producing vision, producing knowledge, leads to calm, to direct knowledge, to self-awakening, and to unbinding. And unbinding means liberation or enlightenment. So that is his statement of the middle way. He equated the two extremes are equal in their unskillfulness, their unusefulness. So the Buddha's enlightenment, there's a little picture of the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, which is where it's said that he achieved his enlightenment after a long period of meditation. During this process of enlightenment, he realized the key elements of his Dharma, which are the Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path, and the 12 links of dependent origination, about which I'm sure we will hear much more in this course. So, setting the wheel of Dharma in motion, the Buddha first doubted after he realized all of these truths, whether it was worthwhile trying to share his insights with others. He had a pretty keen assessment of human nature, and he just really, at first, doubted whether he could convey these truths to other people and whether ordinary people would have the capability of learning them and taking them in. But the story goes that I think it was it a divine being or somebody that appeared to him and hinted that, you really should, share these teachings, that it will be worthwhile and some will be able to learn them. So, it is worthwhile to teach, to share these teachings with others. So first he went back to his 5 companions led by Kaudinya, these ascetics. When they saw him coming, they had sort of parted company with the Buddha because they thought that he had turned away from their ascetic path, and so they didn't really respect him anymore. But when they saw him approach, they realized that just by looking at him, that he had really accomplished something new. And so they listened to the teachings, and they were so advanced in their own practice that they became arhants and the first members of the Buddha's Sangha. This is a picture of Sarnath, where this event occurred.
And a road trip coming on.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Yeah, that's right. So skipping the Buddha's long, lengthy teaching career of about 45, 50 years, really straight to his parinirvana. And he died at the age of 80 in the abandoned jungles of Kushinara, which is present-day Kushinagar in India. Then his final words were, "All composite things pass away. Strive for your own liberation with diligence." That's the Buddha's life in a nutshell. Skipping all the important bits, which were his teachings, which we're obviously going to explore in greater depth in all components of the course. Okay, I just wanted to see what people were able to come up with in terms of study questions from the references in the 3 chapters that I had you read. Did that work for most people? I know Heidi had a problem finding some of the references. Oh yeah, at the end of the book. Oh yeah.
See, I had overlap.
Oh, yeah, there were endnotes. Anyway, did anybody, yeah.
I
Kathy.
had a lot of trouble with them because it often referred to the wrong sutra.
Oh, really?
That's what I found too. I didn't know if it was me or what to do.
The sutra didn't really have anything to do with the section that was referenced in
Yes.
the section of the story that was that
Yes.
referenced it.
Okay,
For
bad
one of the
scholarship.
quotes, I found it just by searching for the king's name. And
Oh,
it was a totally different sutra from the
Really?
one that was in the book.
gosh,
So
okay.
it-
I know you pointed out that some of these sutras had not been translated by Thanissaro Bhikkhu.
Right.
Does that mean they're not in English anywhere?
There are actually, the source that I got is, the online, this book here is actually, the translation of most of the sutras, okay? But then there are some of the sutras, I forgot to bring the book, that I cannot find, okay? Because they are in the Pali language. But there are some links that, especially for the Anguttara Nikaya, for like Samyutta, Digha, Majjhima, and Anguttara, well, not Anguttara, what is the other one? Most of them are translated in English. But the Anguttara Nikaya is coming up in November this year. That is a revised translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. So, but before then, Venerable Nyanaponika did do some translations on the Anguttara Nikaya. I will email everybody a link. So, and then also I found a website that that is showing some of the translations, but that website it's not that good. See, what I did is, okay, if I can't find it in English, I'll find it in Chinese, and I'll try to pick it out, one way or the other. But it's a little bit difficult because some of the Chinese Nikaya or Agama did not cover the Nikaya portion, or vice versa. The best way is, the way that I did is I find the subject matter and I Google it. Okay, say if I'm looking at, say for example, say, okay, 5 precepts. So I'll Google 5 precepts and see if I can pull out information from, some of the websites. That's how I do it. And then also when we read, and this is what I'm going to share with you guys, if you find a sutra, if you're lucky, find a sutra that you want, especially in this book, at the end, it's going to have some references. Okay, so it's not just like if we're looking for, say, Majjhima Nikaya Sutta number 130. So if you, flip through that break of books there and you find that sutra, it's going to refer you to other sutras. Say SN 2.33, it's similar teaching. So
That book
this set of book really had a lot of references at the end of each sutra.
So they could be similar?
Yes,
Wow.
yes, they do. So I would recommend that you go through it and see if you can find the one that you want to. Sometimes when the Buddha gave teaching, they kind of, one all depends on the situation. But there are a lot of similar teachings. They collected in various Pali canon, in the discourses in the basket. And I even did the Vijnana part because I can't find it in the Dhamma, in the discourse session. So I went to the Vijnana part. So one of the techniques that we learn is not only understanding the teaching, but also how to research for it.
Yeah, it sounds in this case though that this particular ebook had inaccurate references. Sounds like that. Did anybody come up with an accurate?
I found,
Did you find something?
but it was difficult to find because they used, the ebook uses references like MN2 or
Yeah.
just M2, like
Yeah.
Roman numeral 2.
Yeah,
And that didn't necessarily correspond to what was on Access to Insight.
right.
But I think I found it.
Share.
Yeah. Well, the one was, well, one in particular, the reference was SN 780.
Yeah,
And what that corresponded to, it seemed to me, on Access to Insight was the Jutta Taka Sutta, which is just titled Corrupted. And it was more of a commentary, it seemed like, by the Thanissaro Bhikkhu, is that his name?
that is one.
Yeah, Thanissaro, than it was maybe the actual
Oh,
sutta itself. So it's like it references, the ebook references a sutta, but when you look that up, that's really a commentary on the underlying sutta, which when I went to find that, I could only find it in the Pali.
wow.
There wasn't,
Also, some of those numbers you mentioned are from the Pali Text Society translations. They're not from the ones that are used predominantly by Thanissaro Bhikkhu.
Okay.
That's a good point. So there are two different numbering systems that
Right.
are found in
Okay.
compilations.
but
Well,
it's a great
this-
challenge.
this has been a learning experience. This has been a learning experience. That's really good to know. Yeah.
You tried to throw that curveball, didn't you?
Yeah. Just to see how you. That's fun. Okay, well then I suggest that, unless anybody has a study question they were able to come up with that they'd like to share, because if you've done the work, I don't want to skip over it.
Well, I
Yes.
I was just curious as to people's opinions on, like, the story of the Buddha's foster mother, who became the first
None?
nun, the bhikkhuni, I guess it is.
Right, yes.
And how at first the Buddha was like, no, it's not happening, and then Ananda
Mm-hmm,
convinced him, but then he gave some extra rules,
yeah,
and I guess that stick to this day. Is that
yeah.
correct?
Yeah, I didn't have that.
And I was just wondering, especially for women, how they feel about that.
It seemed like monks had preference over nuns.
Is that just a cultural thing
Uh-huh.
back then? Or, I don't know. That's what I was wondering.
Well, I understand.
I asked that question.
Do you know, and it really, I had, since we're talking today during my time about the Confucianism versus the Taoism, and a lot of the Confucianism at the time in China was kind of blended in with Buddhism. There's a part, what's it called? The 5 harmonious relationships. I'm probably not saying this correctly. And it was very much based on division. You know, one of them is
Right.
husband versus wife, and the wife is very revered, but is subservient to the husband,
Right.
and then it's like older brother versus younger brother. So I'm just bringing that, I think that was very culturally relevant at the time, and not just in China. I mean, I think it was just kind of, so I never get offended by it, because I feel that's how it was. You know, that's just how it was, even 100 years ago, you know, I mean, so, but I think that cold Confucianism had a big play in it. It sounds like from the research I'm doing based on my section, a lot of like the translation, the figuring out of Buddhism, they were pulling some of that Confucianism, and that was a really large part of it, was the respect of, you know, the I want to say boss, but the boss to the servant, the
Hierarchies.
husband to the wife, the older sibling to the younger, and there was actually, they talked quite a bit about how a woman was supposed to, I don't want to say 3 bosses, but it was her dad, and then until she got married, and then it was her husband, and then when her husband passed, so I guess that whole we live longer, then it was her son.
Right.
So I just think that was all part of it.
I suspect too, in a non-technological society, that a strict division of labor was more useful to, you know, social coherence and all that kind of thing. I wonder if Venerable Kongshi would like to say anything about the rules for women versus men. If you have anything to share about that and your direct wisdom.
Well, during the India time, when they set a lot of rules for women, because a lot of times when the female women there are more,
So the Skypers can hear you.
okay, just talk about at those times, the women are more considered as a weak person, and then a lot of time because of the, the society at that time is not very safe for women to walk anywhere by themselves, and also they are, always in the danger of abuse by men. So the Buddhas have a lot of concern about that, because if the bhikkhunis as a female monks, if we start, being more monastic and then abused by a lay person or anyone, that is a very bad karma for the, for the lay. And so the Buddha thought about that. So a lot of rules are set to keep the women in safety, actually. And at those times, the women always have to stay in a group and close by near to the monks, and then they have to go to the monks for teachings, because then, because they are, the monks are close by, and so they have to go to the monks for study. So, and a lot of times they will set some of the rules to respect the monks. But remember, during the Buddha time, there's no wording written down. And then after the council meeting, the monks who are setting up the rules are very, we'll say they, Mahakasapa, he's very, very strong. He doesn't like women. And another guy is the one that most women are like, because he actually always protect, give a lot of, rules, and always ask the Buddha to, give something for the women, and so women actually kind of like Ananda very much and don't like Mahakasapa, because he's kind of not a women person. So a lot of rules were set by, their group, on how the women should respect the monastic and, the monk, especially the bhikkhus. And so even they said, even a young monk who is ordained later, younger, senior, junior than the bhikkhunis still have to bow to them. So to this day, we have a group of bhikkhunis in Taiwan that we are not doing that. So we take off that rules. So those are the rules that we don't feel like, this is not really from the Buddha. The Buddha doesn't really set a rules like that, because respect is something that, the person, depends on the person. It's not like, we have to, like a young monk, we have to bow to them because they are monk and we are female monk. So those are the things that is not what the Buddha will taught. So things like that, So the rules, some of the rules we still carry on until this day. The bhikkhunis will observe, and some of the rules we will think about it and see whether we should follow or not. So there are about 8 of them. They call the respective, dharma or the precepts that we have to follow to respect the bhikkhus. Those are the ones that some of the bhikkhunis in Thailand we already have that off, and we will not follow that.
Thank you very much. That's really interesting, and nice to hear that there's that much.
Excuse me.
Yes.
There might be another aspect. I just thought about it. I don't think it is documented anywhere, but there is another aspect of. I think I speak kind of loud enough.
It's just for the sake of the people on the
Oh,
computer.
okay.
The
So there's
Skypers.
another aspect of why there are different rules for the women. I think that just for the administrative aspect itself, if we do not have a different set of rules for another big group of people, there might be a situation where I decide, a group of us decide to leave the Sangha and form another Sangha. This rule is to bind a group of people together, provide an opportunity for harmonic practices. Otherwise, maybe that a group of bhikkhuni later on, if there is no such rule, that there are 8 rules that bound them with the community of bhikkhu at that time, maybe many years later, they would choose some way or another to kind of split up. So that's in my opinion in terms of administratively. that maybe that is one of the aspects that I don't think that anybody brought up or discussed it in the past. We all talk about many things, and if we and we need to understand the aspect of we are not there 2,500 years ago. But if you look at all of the depiction of ascetic life, you go anywhere, you see the pictures of a man's ascetic, not a woman ascetic. So essentially, it is somewhat influenced by those things. So the rule here, from my interpretation, is more or less foresee that it will keep the Sangha together. There's some kind of loosely rule there to keep them together instead of splitting them. That is my personal observation.
Thank you for that. Anybody else have any observations about that question? Yeah.
One thing I had, I don't remember where I was talking through. No. One thing, I don't remember where I heard this from, but one of my teachers said that one idea was that perhaps the Buddha had refused at first because he did not want to be forcing this upon the Sangha from above. He wanted some of them to think about this, to see her coming back and asking again sincerely, and for them to think, well, the woman should be in here, because women were so excluded from those roles in India that he wanted them to be able to turn their mind around the problem and come forward and say, well, we should allow women in our group because it's, our Sangha and we should be in here. So that he wasn't forcing it on them, which could have caused some strife, perhaps.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense and shows a lot of wisdom and insight. Yeah. Anyone else? I wanted to talk about this a bit more next week too, so we can say some more things after reading some additional materials about that. Yeah.
I've got a quick question.
Yeah.
This particular section of the this particular part of the ebook that we read, there was a reference in here to the Buddha being openly critical of some of the other traditions at the time, the Jains and the Brahmins, and there's a quote in here where he makes some pretty pointed observations about them, and those types of quotes are always curious to me, just like the exclusion of women or his initial decision not to teach the Dharma after his enlightenment. And unfortunately, I don't necessarily have a great theory to explain that to offer up, but it was just a question, because I'm always surprised when I see something like that, and I always find myself wanting or thinking, well, there must be some kind of grand explanation here or a reason that when it's explained to me, I'll go, oh wow, wasn't that was a great way to handle the situation. But, so I'd be interested in anyone else's thoughts on that type of comment.
It doesn't sound very ecumenical, does it?
Right.
It's a very sort of, I guess, modern concept. I was interested in Master Jiru's reference this morning to the Jains and the Buddha adopting, it was actually the practice of the rains retreat that was originated by the Jains. Is that what everybody else heard?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then he decided that that would be a good practice to emulate. So it kind of goes against maybe the quote that was included in that reading. Yes.
Just to follow up what he was saying, I understand what he was saying. It's very curious to me too that apparently the Buddha, when he became enlightened, and so from my understanding, he understood that he was a Buddha in line. There was all these Buddhas before him, and he was the next in line. And so it was his responsibility to teach. But if he knew that, then why did he question? Apparently, according to the story, why did he question? This can be so difficult to do. And then the Steve came down to convince him. So anyway, it just raises some questions. And like you said, so what's the the story and what's the root? It's very interesting.
That's a good question. Yeah, it is a good question, especially when you put it in the context of knowing sort of his place in the in the history of enlightened beings. Does anybody have any insights into that? Yeah.
I don't know how accurate this is. I could be completely wrong, this is just off the top of my head, but what if he didn't want to, what if he hesitated because it was more like a self-cautious thing? They're not gonna listen to me anyway, they're all stuck in their own world. And he just needed that little bit of push from the deity to be like, go ahead and do that. Just a thought.
Sure.
When the Buddha became enlightened, at that point he had just been an ascetic. He hadn't really been a teacher up to that point. And so he had this great realization, was enlightened, and he's like, how am I going to teach this to all these people? How am I going to teach this to the everyday person who has a job, has a house, and I would maybe think that it was sort of overwhelming at that point. It's like, how am I going to do this? Sort of thing, and since he hadn't taught, maybe he was thinking,
Maybe
I'm
he
aesthetic, not
maybe
a
he
teacher.
had an alternative path he could have followed as along the Bodhisattva path of sort of serving beings in another way. Does that make sense to you, Venerable Kumshi? That maybe there's something that the Buddha could have done aside from teaching, and that's why he perhaps hesitated to teach? No. Catherine, let's share the microphone, Catherine.
But there is a reason. That the Buddha didn't want to teach at the beginning, immediately after his enlightenment. This is actually a good concept that we, all of us, should understand. If I say that there are spirits filling the whole space with our faculty, can we see? Can we touch? Can we smell? Can we hear? So what happened is the faculties that we have as a human being, there are something, say things in the third dimension or fourth dimension, we're not able to come in contact with. And the teaching of the Buddha, the way of, how he became enlightened, he went through a path that unless we ourselves experience it, we won't be able to understand. Agree with that?
Yep.
Unless we practice his path, then we won't be able to experience. If I pinch myself and I say, ouch, can you feel my pain? You understand my pain, but you can't feel it. Am I correct there? So at the beginning, after his enlightenment, he was thinking about the way that I went through is so profound that human beings with their faculties won't be able to understand. So after he was being asked by a celestial being, by a deva, that out of compassion, he decided to put it in words. Don't forget that anything can be expressed in words or conceptualization. That is why he urged us not to just listen, not to just believe, but experience it, practice it. So that is the reason why he didn't want to teach at the beginning. Make sense?
Thanks, Kathy. Thank you very much.
And something I've always wondered, I was really interested in American Indian culture, so I took a lot of classes on that. So I wonder how much of this hesitation we are concerned with in our particular culture. Like, for example, in the American Indian culture, it's considered a very valuable trait to hesitate. to take time to think things through, to weigh out all the options. So that wouldn't even be seen as something odd in that culture, just to use that culture as an example. So I wonder how much of this is just something that our particular culture is tied up in because we believe we immediately need a response and we need to respond. You know, they talk all the time about how we believe the American Indians were very unintelligent when we soon after found out that they took a very long time to hesitate before they spoke and responded to things, which actually is a great sign of intelligence when you think about it. But our particular culture is so quick to respond. We're rather impulsive, I guess is the word I'm thinking. So I'm wondering if this question is just a question we have because we view decisiveness immediately as a positive trait, whereas so many other cultures view that not in the same way. So I just something I'm curious about.
It's another good viewpoint on the issue. Okay, I would also like us to talk a bit. Did anybody get a chance to look at the Buddhist economics link that Jason shared? Anybody have a look at that? It's pretty interesting. Would you like to introduce us to that issue?
I'll do my best.
Yeah, please do, that'd be great. And I did ask everybody to think about ways in which we, as lay people, can maybe alter our lives, our lifestyles, in order to, well, I also had you read the little essay by Bhikkhu Bodhi on the monastic lifestyle and why it's considered that faster, straighter road to enlightenment, right? So this gave rise to the issue of how we can, as lay people, maybe approach that lifestyle a bit more while still maintaining our responsibilities in the world. So,
I guess I was interested by Bhikkhu Bodhi's article, and that's how I came upon this essay on Buddhist economics, which then led me back to the original source, which is a book written by a German economist named E.F. Schumacher, and he's the first person that I could find credited with this, study of Buddhist economics. He was a fan of Gandhi and traveled to India. And so, at any rate, the thrust of the article is that, as pointed out in the Bhikkhu Bodhi piece, that and it's worth noting too that the full title of Mr. Schumacher's book is called "Small is Beautiful," and then the subtitle is "Economics as if People Mattered." And so the whole idea is that the Buddhist view of economics would be that all the transactions that we're involved in are more important than just the fulfillment of supply and demand, but it's really more about actual need, like the master was talking about this morning, rather than just want. And that to the extent we can decentralize economics and focus more on what we really need rather than what we just want, and keep in mind the impact that all of our purchasing decisions have, not just on us, but the people who are tasked with making the products and mining the rare earth minerals that go into all of our smartphones and laptops, etc., that we are really engaged in practice when we're making those decisions, if they're based on the underlying principles of our Buddhist beliefs. So that's kind of a nutshell.
that's a really good. Everybody heard of Small is Beautiful? It's kind of a classic by this time. Oh, it's a really classic book on living simple.
Into all of our smartphones and laptops, etc., that we are really